Good afternoon to those of you who have just joined us. I think we have a session kicking off at 12:15. We've seen the doors opening 10 minutes ago and some of you coming out into this breakout session, and we'll give it another 30 seconds before we kick things off. But thank you for joining us today. I am Paul Sefton. I am speaking today from Copenhagen at Jabra's head offices, and looking forward to discussing what I think is really topical for a lot of people right now, which is as we have this pivotal shift into hybrid working from an all-remote workforce for many of our organizations, start to use technology as our new virtual headquarters to then level the playing field and create inclusive and flexible collaboration, no matter where someone is working from. So I think we've just a minute past and we can kick things off. As mentioned, my name is Paul. I'll be talking to you today about inclusive and flexible collaboration in the future of hybrid work. I work on Jabra's brand communications, and basically what I've spent the better part of the last year doing is researching with all of our business units what the future of the office might look like, how we can use tech to create more inclusive cultural habits, organizational policies, as well as equipping people and team leads and managers and organizations across all levels with the tools they need to be able to thrive in a hybrid environment. So for those of you who are not familiar with Jabra, I will start off just by talking about how we are a part of the GN Group, a Danish group that has been going for over 152 years, a very strong heritage, and one of the only technology companies to be able to house medical, professional, and consumer-grade research and development and technology engineering under one roof. And today we will be looking at the professional side of the Jabra business and how enterprise video and audio solutions can equip a hybrid workforce for the future. So we've got three main sections to talk through today. The first one is a slight recap on where we've been, the journey from remote to this pivotal moment we have in hybrid. The next is going to be looking at, with the changes we see and can predict coming in a hybrid workforce, how can you make things more inclusive and how can you make things more flexible, and how this will play into factors like the war on talent right now and where people choose to work based on the types of policies and technologies you use to potentially enable your workforce. And so that will take us through to the third section, where we'll be talking a lot about enabling people-centered practices built on a foundation of technology. So I'm going to jump into the first. And I think there are some key observations we've taken away from the last year. It's been a huge experiment for everyone. We saw in November 2019 on a platform like Microsoft Teams, 19 million users. By March 2020, that had ballooned to over 40 million. And in the Microsoft earnings call about 2 weeks ago, we saw Satya Nadella saying that that had jumped to 140 million, almost 12 months since the pandemic forced so many companies into this overnight shift to virtual work. We've seen with that almost 3/4 of the workforce globally in knowledge working spaces shifting to working remotely at least 1 day a week. And a more positive result than that, we've seen 83% of them saying that it's been a successful shift. What some of the big pluses have been from remote working in the last year. With this experiment, we saw this massive acceleration of digital technology and digital transformation with this adoption. And with that, we've seen this confidence that's grown in terms of our ability to be productive and work from home. Initially, we had a bit of a struggle. I think server numbers were showing that employees were working up to 3 hours extra a day. So we had these challenges like work-life balance coming into play last year, where productivity was up 45%, but perhaps we had to try and find a better equilibrium and balance. And the latest research out of Nicholas Bloom's lab at Stanford has shown that we'll see a longer-term sustained 5% uptick in our productivity as we settle into hybrid and go into this longer-term configuration of flexible working. I think if we look at some of the upsides of remote working, we've seen a lot of people reporting, more than 3/4 of the workforce, a better work-life balance. We've seen part of this being attributed to a lack of a commute. And though we know that in some instances that's had a downside and perhaps increased fatigue from long meetings all virtually and a lack of boundaries between our personal and professional lives, there have been upsides too in terms of factors like, oh, well, now I can spend more time with my children or my family, or there are moments which I'm not missing out on as much. And with that, we've seen some of the upsides, which we've looked at, but they come with these downsides. One of the key downsides that we're concerned with at the moment is that while there's been this huge boom in one-to-one chats amongst your average workers, in other words, people who've been with a company for more than 6 to 12 months, with new hires, we've seen this siloing and this drop in any type of cross-functional communication, any cross-departmental communication, and all of the small moments where you'd have run-ins with colleagues who you might not work directly with have decreased. And if you think about why we're bringing in new colleagues and why we're bringing in new workforce talent, that comes down to innovation and creativity and driving that in our businesses. And so if there's not a smooth onboarding process and way for employees to engage with each other, then that's a bit of a concern, because if you look at the numbers at a high level, yes, chats are up, but it's really become a far more endangered space where we're in these silos, and that side of communication is strong, but the side of communication which is fostering innovation is potentially less so. And so with that in mind, we know we need to return to the office. And I think we've seen a fairly consistent tracking of the types of frequencies people are wanting to go back in globally. Most executives are agreeing, as well as employees, that 3 days a week, 2 to 3 days a week, this can differ, is the ideal type of number and balance for a return to the office. And so there's very few people saying they want to stay entirely remote, and also very few people who are saying they want to return to a full office workspace 5 days a week. So all indicators are pointing towards a flexible and hybrid future. We've got almost 3/4 of the workforce wanting these flexible options we've seen introduced in the last year staying and are being seen as a new benefit and a new way to retain talent. We've got global leaders, almost 90% of them, saying that they expect to see the upsides and benefits of a flexible workforce as a set of policies that they will maintain going forward as they introduce permanent hybrid working setups. And so you've got then almost 3/4 of organizations globally saying that hybrid work really is the future for them. But when we had an all-remote workforce, everyone was even. And if we had an all-in-office workforce before the pandemic, then everyone was also even. So I think the big question for us is, how do you create an even playing field, and how can technology help and do that when you have the spontaneity or randomness of an entire organization choosing to engage with hybrid? So before we go into the next summary, just a small recap. We've seen in this test of the last 12 months the benefits of remote working, and that it can be done and we can maintain productivity. Trust amongst managers and employees can go up in these circumstances. And at the same time, we know that the office as we knew it is not going to be the office of the future. It needs rethinking and it needs recodifying. How an organization chooses to define what its office is there for, how they decide to therefore repurpose their office, and then how employees are instructed to use the office as a resource rather than a standard workplace is really going to impact the effectiveness of any organization's hybrid working policy. And we know that where traditionally a physical brick and mortar location like a head office was your centralized point for any organization, that's now something which technology is going to have to fill the vacuum of with hybrid, where you have a centralized virtual headquarters and the office becomes a resource for certain types of work which we do. So let's look forward to the way that we can potentially start introducing inclusive and flexible hybrid work in the new normal. Flexibility as a benefit for everyone is about being able to work wherever, whenever. And I think while we've discussed some of the issues like boundary management, the upside of this is that with that productivity uptick, employees can essentially work from anywhere. You can do it while you're commuting if you're not driving, if you're taking a train or public transport. You can do it from a coffee shop, perhaps. When travel is reintroduced, it might be a case of doing it while you're traveling again. And so more and more, instead of investing heavily in a premised resource which is fixed, it's going to come down to the question of how can you enable your workforce to do that work wherever they are, whether it's at home, co-located somewhere else, or in the office. And that will also give employees in turn the ability to try and figure out when am I most productive and how can I do the work that I want to do with the highest output and productivity. And we think that we'll see major productivity upticks from this, giving employees the flexibility to do their best work at a time that suits them by giving them the technological tools to work wherever and however they choose to. We looked at a model which McKinsey had released towards the end of last year and some of the upsides and downsides of this. On the left-hand side, you've got things like a limited remote working range. And we think that more and more, this is an option which few companies will choose because employees will start to vote with their feet and leave if they don't have the flexibility that they've benefited from in the last year as something which they can carry in as a benefit for their work going forward. So on the one hand, when you have this limited remote work and a large headquarters, you have a lower access to talent. You can't resource and recruit people from as wide of a geographic pool as you might have been able to. You could see a slightly higher productivity uptick from in-person collaboration, but you'll also see a really high real estate cost. And as you shift from left to right on this slide, you can see some of the models shifting from a limited remote work and large centralized headquarters to a hybrid set of models, and then on the far right, an entirely remote workforce, where yes, you're saving on the cost of real estate, but you really are perhaps starting to limit some of those serendipitous moments that we've come to miss from in-office collaboration. And so we see this shift then, which we've discussed, on a traditional headquarters to something where you have an ecosystem of places where you can work. And that begs the question of, well, how can we effectively work from any of these places, no matter where we are? And I think there are quite a few different considerations which not only the C-suite, but technology procurement teams will have to be considering. And some of these that we've identified are some of the spatial needs which people have. We've got 67% of employees talking about wanting to restructure what was an open office space into a collaboration space. So how do you look at repurposing your traditional office spaces for more collaboration, if that's what you want to turn the office as a resource into when people return to the office? You've got the temporal needs which have been beneficial in the last year, which will need to remain in some way, because I think every country is vaccinating at a different rate. Every organization will have different preferences for how they bring people back into the office safely based on regional guidelines. And you have large groups of the workforce, like working parents, who will need that flexibility and to be able to pick and choose their remote schedules, to be able to help manage their private lives with their professional ones. And then there's the task-based question. And this is quite an important one because I think it'll change quite a bit. You might initially need more collaboration spaces in your offices moving forward, and to convert some of the traditionally open office spaces into more collaborational breakaway spaces. But those needs might change. And we see right now that employees are ranking collaboration and focus as their top two most important elements in the return to the office. And so it's considerations like, how do you cater for introverts and extroverts on your workforce? And how do you cater to people who are having more demands in their parenting lives and needing that flexibility in terms of staying in a remote schedule and not necessarily having the freedom to come back into the office without being at that disadvantage? So these are some of the concerns. And if we jump into some of them in more detail, let's look at the office for a second and some of the potential outcomes you could have. We see people who might have the need for an individual work zone. Maybe it's an individual work zone where you're going in because you need to focus, and what you have as a home working setup isn't that conducive. You've got construction going on outside. You've got a really busy household, and you just can't focus. You're getting deliveries at your door, all kinds of things which might be distracting you. And so a day in the office is not a day to collaborate. It's actually just a day to get some work done. On the other hand, you might be going in and needing to collaborate. And so you're going into the office, but it's to collaborate with an all remote participant base. And so you need an individual type of space, which is fully equipped technologically for remote work, or for the inclusion of remote workers, shall I say. You might have group work zones. There's a big debate right now over things like hot desking. Do you still need a dedicated desk, or are you happy to have a hot desking setup where you work in neighborhoods or islands? And perhaps you just want to get that team morale and that sense of working amongst colleagues where you're not collaborating in a meeting environment or on a project basis, but you're collaborating to build that social capital. Perhaps you do need to collaborate on a project in a strict meeting, and then you'll need meeting rooms. The question is still open on whether they should be small, medium, or large, and what those needs will be, and what type of equipment they will need for flexible adaptation. Maybe you'll have big halls which can be subdivided into smaller breakaway spaces. But ultimately, you need technology which is going to be flexible enough to adapt to these changing needs, and ideally a data set that can tell you how your spaces are being used when you return to the office, so that you can make informed decisions on potentially updating those office spaces. So we're going to jump into a quick poll where if you click on the side, you should see the poll and the corresponding options to vote with this, where we're keen to get a temperature check on what are the main reasons you might return to the office. Is it for in-person collaboration, face-to-face, with people who you would prefer not to collaborate with virtually? Is it maybe for that individual focus work? Is it to just go in and build social capital and teams and have that morale and sense of being in a place with colleagues driving a single purpose? Or is it to get more of those serendipitous water cooler moments where you're going in for inspirational or cross-departmental innovation breakthroughs in the hope that you might stumble across something which just wouldn't be possible in a virtual environment? So if you can all vote on that, it'd be fantastic for us to be able to see what some of the results are and what your considerations might be in terms of bringing people back into the office. So that poll will stay open on the right-hand side of the session, but for now I'll move on to the next slide, although you can still vote on it within the right-hand side session section under the poll tab. So jumping forward now to the temporal flexibility, I think we've realized some of the big benefits of trust that have been proved in this remote working experiment. We've realized that you don't have to see someone to be able to trust that they get their work done. We've maybe shifted our performance metrics from face time spent in the office to outcomes and output. And with that, we've been able to give employees the flexibility that they still want in the future. So maybe that's around figuring out what hours in the day you're most productive, when you want to schedule your meetings or your personal time, and how you want to collaborate, and how that relates to the spaces in which you want to work. Maybe it's around days of the week in which you align with your other colleagues. No one wants to go into an office where they think they're going in for in-person collaboration, only to see that everyone else is dialed in. And I can speak from experience when I say that that's happened to me a few times with our gradual reintroduction of going into the office. And it's quite disappointing to see your colleagues dialing in when you'd really hoped for that in-person time. And then the other side of things could be organizations looking at what times of the year do I want to bring people together, and what types of office space should I create because of that. We might see companies doing 6-month offsites, which will build enough social and team cohesion to get them through the balance of the next 6 months in the projects they're executing. So the other thing which I think we know we need to consider, with all of the unique circumstances which people have, there's really a lot of questions that are up in the air around, why do I go back into the office? What's the expectation of my manager putting me back into the office? What if I can't go back in, but other people can? Will I have a fear of missing out? Will there be social capital that's being built that I'm not a part of? And so we're seeing a large amount of uncertainty amongst team members and the discomfort and anxiety that that can cause. And so the main consideration we're bearing in mind right now from a technological point of view is, how can we create technology experiences that are inclusive and support everyone, not only for productive and seamless collaboration, but also for an experience in which no one is left behind. We know that 95% of employees report that emotional support has helped them feel more positive, less stressed, more productive at work. And people who feel part of this bigger community and trusted have less burnout, higher energy, more productivity, engagement, and innovation. And we know this as well from Microsoft's latest research, where bumping into an office and having these serendipitous moments is what builds the social capital that sparks ideas and conversations and is actually quite pivotal to the success of an organization. And so it's going to be a key question on how do you bring people back into the office and encourage those social activities that are fostering the overall success of the organization and not expecting them just to go from meeting to meeting or be at a desk working. So we really have to look now to the considerations that a manager might have. We had an interesting statistic this year from Gallup saying that managers own 70% of their employees' engagement, whether they are remote or not. And so we have these key considerations on, well, how does a manager ensure that an employee has the right technology to be able to engage and to feel committed to their work, driven by that purpose of the company? And we think that if you provide teams with the right technology tools to connect, can humanize and engage workers, make sure that everyone's included. And then off of the baseline of that technology, how do you drive cultural and policy changes that have those emotionally supportive environments and allow people to feel included, whether that's in an onboarding experience for new hires or maintaining the morale of longstanding employees? So this is where we get quite excited and nerd out a little bit around the technology side of things, enabling people-centered hybrid work practices with technology. We're really pleased to have released a new portfolio of collaboration solutions that we think can really speak to some of the challenges that we've seen with this shift to hybrid and that we predict will be coming up in the next 6 to 18 months. And so if we start to look at technology and how it can open doors for hybrid collaboration, I've spoken a little bit about how the office, in terms of how we redefine it, will become more of a resource for certain types of work for people to access. And technology will really become the place and the thing which unites companies where all information can be shared and all collaboration can be done. Because I think even if we go back into the office, we're going to see a very rare situation in which everyone can collaborate in person, face to face. There will almost always be a remote participant. So how do we create a flexible working culture which can contribute to more satisfied employees, people who feel included and seen, not left out, able to collaborate whether they're in the office or out of the office? How do we look at increasing the well-being and productivity of hybrid teams? I think the well-being side is really interesting and seeing how technology can fuel well-being, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. How can we then, in all of this uncertainty, start to collect data that optimizes the space utilization and helps us update these spaces so that we know what types of collaboration our employees are coming back into the office for, and we can then create flexible collaboration solutions and spaces in the office to cater to these needs. And we also know that a lot of people are quite cautious to come back into the office. They might not feel safe doing so, even after they've had a vaccination. So I think we've got to ask how we can create a safe and innovative collaboration experience for employees, where if you're coming back into the office, you can still go into meeting rooms where you have the right technology that allows you to be socially distanced if that's what you choose. Or if you choose not to come back into the office for a safety concern or a situational circumstance, that you're able to do so without feeling like you'll be left behind, and you have the right technology to be able to dial into a meeting and be an equal participant, seen and heard, and able to see and hear the people who are together in the same meeting room, irrespective of where you might be joining from. So we know that we're always talking about technology, but it's not just us. The hybrid return to the office is really fueling more and more tech investment. While 12 months ago, I think everyone was clamoring to try and get everyone set up almost overnight for work and to remain connected and able to meet with their teams and their colleagues. Now we're starting to think of this longer-term impact of hybrid working, and I think it calls for a new cycle of consideration around the way we use our offices and the way we create a level playing field, and a new cycle of tech investment. We've seen 72% of the US executives are planning to invest in tools for virtual collaboration to make hybrid work. We've seen 73% of leaders expecting flexible office places to play some kind of role in a future strategy, and 66% of leaders saying that they are considering a redesign of the hybrid office space for this return to the office and a new way of working. We've understood in the last 12 months what we can get from a home working environment, and that's why it's going to be so critical to understand what exactly the office space is there for. Maybe it is more of a social side of collaboration where we have the trust and team building, which enables us to then succeed in the organization no matter where we're working from after we've taken that time in the office. So we're going to jump forward to another poll now. And this is a key question we keep asking and we keep seeing other people asking. And it's, what types of office spaces would you most want to return to? For some people, it's about still having that dedicated personal desk. Other people might be happy at a hot desk, and they could be happy having one tech bundle which they can move with them anywhere. And it's really an office in a box where they can connect and collaborate with a laptop, a keyboard, the right audio and video solutions. And it doesn't matter where they're working from, but they're happy to hot desk because they're only going to be back in the office for a certain number of days. Some people will just want meeting rooms because they see the primary purpose of that office as being a space where they can come together face to face to get through meetings. And other people might want it as that one-person private space where they can either collaborate with all virtual participants, or they can just focus and put their head down and have a space that's quiet where they have the ability to concentrate and really get the work done, which they might not be able to do elsewhere. So again, if you open out your session sidebar in the poll section, we would love it if you could let us know what type of space you would be going in for and what that would be for. So I will move on to some of the next section. We want to look at enabling flexible task-based workspaces with technology. We know from big real estate companies like CBRE that activity-based work is seen as the new way of working in offices. And so how do you create activity-based or task-based workspaces with technology? And that comes down to flexible solutions where no matter what room you go into, if it's for meeting, you have 100% video, audio, and data coverage of that room to be able to provide you with an inclusive and immersive and natural experience. And so if we look at some of the challenges which we need to solve with this flexible meeting space, the first one is space optimization. You might be wanting to downgrade your real estate in terms of the overall space and save some money, and you might want to be repurposing what was an open office space into more of a meeting room resource. We know that only 5% of Asia-Pacific organizations are tracking conference room video analytics to optimize space utilization. Globally, that stat is at 4%. And if we look at EMEA, from the data we can see, it's less than 1% of organizations in EMEA tracking conference room video analytics to optimize that space. And so if you have a meeting room that is covered in a 180-degree field of view, where you have full video coverage in any meeting room, you can save space in terms of the number of people you can fit into a room, and having that camera right up against the wall with no wasted space by a narrower field of view. And you can also then get data insights into how that room is being used because you have full data coverage of the space. We want to have well-equipped spaces where employees can come in and collaborate seamlessly. Access to tools is a top 5 global concern for employees wishing to return to the office. And so simply having a meeting room that isn't enabled with the right technology is not going to suffice for a lot of employees who are needing to collaborate, and making sure that if you aren't in the office, you still have that inclusive experience in a remote setting. And then the other concern is that 73% of employees are wanting to or are reporting this adherence to safety protocols as the #1 factor that would make them comfortable in returning to the office. So we know that people are wanting safety protocols, and one of those things will be in a meeting room having the right number of people in a meeting room, not overcrowding it, and making sure that you can give employees technology in which they can still be seen and heard while safely social distancing in a shared meeting space. Skipped a slide there. So this is where we believe with our new range of video solutions and collaboration solutions with audio and video that enabling flexible spaces for hybrid work is really going to be made possible. With the Panicast range, you can get video analytics and data with people counting technology. And I'll get into it in a little more detail, but that could be useful for consideration like the number of people who are in a meeting room, setting a meeting room capacity. Maybe it's to do with knowing how frequently and how many people are using certain meeting rooms, and then being able to amend the sizes of your meeting rooms accordingly. Perhaps it's for individual collaboration, meeting group collaboration. Again, if you have someone who's remote and they can't see everyone in a conference room who's present, there's nothing worse than having that moment when you can see someone sneaking out of frame to share a comment with someone in a meeting room and you're remote and you're not available to access that information and that in-meeting experience. And at the same time, you want people who are in that meeting room with a group of people being able to feel that they are seen and heard and able to sit wherever they would like to in a meeting space. And so it comes down to how do you enable intelligent meetings to happen with any number of people located anywhere where workplace safety protocols and safe social distancing are adhered to, no matter what your policy is like at your organization and no matter what the meeting space you're coming into is like. So we have a case study with Get Joanne, who handle meeting room solutions, where we saw that 24% of decision makers say that they lacked the big data availability they needed for managing their facilities intelligently, and that 20% of huddle room users felt that there was never enough resource. They couldn't get the meeting rooms they needed to book. And so we figured out that there was a way with smart camera technology to be able to detect meeting room capacities and also detect if someone's booked a meeting room and they're not in it. We don't want to have a situation where someone's booking a meeting room and they're not able to use it, and then at the same time not able to release it, and that is then a resource which the office has been created for and is no longer able to be used for. At the same time, we have a case study with Room, which is really interesting to look at. Room are creating portable all-in-one meeting room solutions, and they've selected Jabra as the intelligent video and audio partner to equip these spaces for any type of virtual collaboration. On the one hand, they offer individual meeting room spaces and they offer group meeting room spaces. And it's with safety concerns where you have air circulation that's 5 times greater than the standard and camera technology from Jabra that enables safe social distancing while participating in these breakout spaces. And so we're seeing in our partnerships some of these main concerns across all industries that are surfacing and ways in which we can try and address them to make employees feel safe when they're returning to the office and able to connect seamlessly with anyone no matter where they're located. We're also seeing in the conversations we're having with our partners like Zoom that this is a similar concern for them. I have had a few discussions with Jeff Smith, who is the head of Zoom Rooms, and I'll read this quote out, but he said that in this hybrid world that we're all living through and about to dive into more deeply, it becomes more and more important to enable all spaces where people are going to gather physically with video communication technology so that they can communicate seamlessly with people that aren't there. Those spaces are all different in their dimensions and their configuration and where people are seated. And those differences require the technology to adapt to the room rather than requiring the room to adapt to the people. And I think this highlights really well and encapsulates what we've been trying to communicate around flexible and inclusive spaces, which are video and audio enabled to make hybrid working possible no matter where people are located. We're also seeing from Zoom studies that have come out and video fatigue studies that have come out from Microsoft and Zoom and Stanford in the past 6 months that the cognitive load is much higher for virtual participants. And we've realized that humanizing the virtual collaboration experience as much as possible with HD audio and HD video can reduce that cognitive toll which we're seeing on a lot of remote workers. We're also seeing that more than half the workforce are wanting to be remote for at least 3 days of the week. And so there's going to be that great need to bridge the distance between on-site and remote workers. And this is something which technology can solve for all of us. And at the same time, there's this big concern that an exclusion of remote participants will lead to missed opportunities, stagnant innovation, and siloed networks. How will my career progress if I can't reach the people I need to see and get the face time that I need? And how can we then rely on the right collaboration technology and organizational practices to follow and accompany it that enable the networking and innovation and creativity that comes from it to thrive? And so these are some of the features which we think are going to be key to this. We have the 180-degree cameras where you can include all participants equally in the frame. You can also then get full mobility. We know mobility has been a major challenge when we're tied to built-in camera and audio solutions where you can't move around and you're really fixed looking at your screen in one space. So when you have clearer body language and nonverbal communication, meetings can often speed up and people will understand each other far more seamlessly in this humanized virtual environment. Our research team in Cupertino have been working with members from the film industry to try and create virtual and seamless experiences where camera technology can follow active speakers for natural and lifelike collaboration, and where participants can feel like they are able to track speakers and at the same time track creative brainstorming that might be happening on a whiteboard, where a second video feed can focus exclusively on a whiteboard so that virtual participants can be included in a office collaboration experience. And I think one of the most interesting to apply this to is education. We've been speaking a lot about education in the last 12 months, and I think it's been one of the most disrupted spaces. And we had a really interesting case study towards the end of last year with the Sarasota School District in Florida in the US. And in a matter of weeks, we outfitted 2,500 classrooms. And that was something which we did with audio and video capabilities to be able to make sure that distance learning, and particularly hybrid classrooms where some people were, or some students were in the classroom and some students had to be remote, had equal opportunities and access. And so we saw these challenges where teachers needed to keep remote students engaged, even though they weren't physically present, while also being able to give the right type of attention to in-person students. And so the Sarasota School District installed Jabra Panacast cameras and Speak 510s in 2,500 classrooms. And this was from pre-K through to 12th grade. And when we look at the project at a glance, we were able to make sure that teachers had a really good audio experience and that remote participants could hear clearly what was happening in the classroom, while in-person students were able to hear what was being asked of the remote participants when they were joining in. There was also the ability for students who were remote to see every single person who was in that classroom in person. And the benefit and the feedback that we've had from the school district has been that they were productive and flexible and safe spaces. And now when there's a return to schooling in the next 6 months, there's a technology uplift which they can see, and they're able to use it to perhaps offer more regional classes where if you want to take a special or niche course, you can dial into something which might have previously been 3 hours away as a student and you wouldn't have had access to. And so even if this is something which in the long term is not as prevalent in terms of a hybrid or mixed classroom, we're seeing that there's a major technology lift and an opportunity to be able to further accelerate our capacities for productivity and for learning in the classroom through the tech lift of the last 12 months. And just going to lead out of the presentation with a quote from Microsoft, and that's from Ilya Buchstein, who's the GM for Microsoft Teams devices. And we work very closely and we're very focused and invested in our partnership with Microsoft. And in a conversation we recently had earlier this year with Ilya, he was saying how there's an urgency to make every space video enabled and every person video enabled. I think this is a key piece we've covered in this webinar. The assumption is that every interaction will have some remote folks and some folks in person. And all those people, regardless of their location, have to have a great experience. There has to be equity, an equitable sense of experience and inclusion. We need to be able to have a view of the whole space, and using AI and machine learning, giving everybody in the room as much video space as remote people have. And we're seeing companies like Atlassian, the software company, starting to roll out policies now where even if you're in office, you're having to dial in on an individual device to make sure that there's an equitable experience for all remote participants relative to those who are perhaps able to access an office or return to an office space. And so it's this concept of using technology to give everyone an equal share of voice and an equal opportunity to be included that is really key for us in making sure that hybrid succeeds. And so in closing, before we get to questions, because we're almost on time now, we can see that hybrid arrangements have the power to leverage the best of both remote and office work setups. We know what we can get from home working and where the productivity benefits in that lie. And it's going to be up to organizations and how they intelligently equip their workforces with technology and how they redefine the use of the office space to see what the outcomes of a successful hybrid working plan might look like. Organizations will need to create spatial and temporal flexibility to include and retain all employees. An intelligent video will enable flexibility and inclusion in hybrid work. And so with that in mind, I'll open up the floor now to any questions, but I think it's an exciting time for us in terms of the ability to drive greater talent, greater acquisition, and foster as much inclusion and keep all of the productivity benefits and learnings we've seen from the past year of remote working, while reintroducing some of the major benefits which we might be missing from the office in a way in which everyone can feel included and equal, while driving forward a hybrid working future. So I'm not sure if there are any questions, but I will open up the chat now and see if there is anything in the Q&A. But if you have any questions around your considerations for the future of the office, or what you might be looking at as your key considerations, and how you might be looking at bringing people back into work and what technology they need or what setups you can have for a fair and equitable workforce, join the conversation if you have any questions. And I've got some Jabra colleagues with me who would be happy to, as a collective, answer anything that might come your way, or come our way at least. And then perhaps just in closing, as a reminder, we believe, especially for those of you who are joining us today, that you should be able to have a great meeting experience from anywhere. And that's something I think we've covered extensively in this webinar. And so we're giving away a free Speak 710 today with every purchase of our intelligent video conferencing solution, the Jabra Panicast. And so if you would like to take advantage of that, please reach out to Markit or any of the Jabra regional team who will be able to assist you with that. I see we're about on time now, and I'm not sure if there are any questions, but if not, then thank you to everyone who has joined us. And if there are questions, then I would really enjoy any feedback. I think for us, we're driving constant research on the future of the office. We're trying to look into the reasons which people will be going back into the office, and we'll certainly be surfacing new insights in the coming 2 or 3 months on that. I see we have a question from Adam. Is there a 360 camera which selects speakers automatically in the room and has regulated high of the cameras? Adam, I'm not sure if I know what you mean by the regulated high of the cameras. Currently, we're not engineering any solutions around a 360-degree camera. And the 180-degree camera with the field of view we've seen can really offer the most to human experience, which can blanket any room in a full collaboration experience or space. And so it could be an interesting concept. I can definitely circle back in terms of the possibilities of a 360-degree camera, but I think the 180-degree camera is, at least from the research we've seen and the insights we've got, going to be a comprehensive solution for safe social distancing and the fully inclusive experience with the return to the office. Have I missed any other questions? I'm not sure. I'm trying to check the poll results because I think it would be an interesting closing discussion point for anyone who is not about to jump out and grab lunch. But I'm not able to access those right now. Here we are. I see we've got some results coming through. It seems to be a fairly interesting analysis from the types of spaces people are wanting to return to, with a fairly even, excuse me, a fairly even split between personal desk space, hot desking, meeting rooms, and then the one-person private spaces. And I think this really doubles down on the flexibility that workers will need to be able to maintain, because it's definitely not going to be a policy that you can implement and then stick to indefinitely. It will be something which there are constant iterations on. And so seeing the variety and the split in votes of spaces which people are wanting to utilize with their return to the office goes to show how those personal tech solutions are going to be really key, as well as the blanketed audio and video experiences and the flexibility to change the spaces in which you allow people to collaborate while always making sure that there's a virtual option. And so I think there might be other spaces which people are coming back for, but this even split between 20 and 33% with no clear majority amongst the different types of spaces shows that a flexible tech solution is going to be really necessary to be able to marry with a very flexible working space and the need to constantly update those types of spaces. And then interesting to see that I think it's not too surprising most people are returning to the office for in-person collaboration. We've got 63% of people who voted on that in terms of why they would go back into the office. And I think a lot of us are feeling quite similarly about that. But whether it's because you've got a distributed team and people who are located across various continents or countries or co-located offices, or people who are in circumstances in which they can't return to the office immediately, or perhaps can't make it in on that day, that the need to have collaboration tech in all of those spaces is going to be key. Otherwise, we'll get into a point of potential calendar conflicts. Maybe you have a person of six, a team of six who can come into the office, and on one given day, someone has a school run. On another given day, someone's got to stay home for a delivery or to take a private doctor's appointment. And so to be able to maintain that business continuity and keep the productivity up, having flexible solutions where, yes, you might want to go in for in-person collaboration, but it shouldn't be a disadvantage for you to stay at home if you're not able to make it in on that specified office day. And it shouldn't be something in which you're then not able to fully participate in that meeting or see everyone who's in the office or feel like you can be seen from a remote location. So I can completely agree with and understand that in-person collaboration is why we're mostly wanting to go back, as well as with 36% of you voting to build social capital. And I think the two go hand in hand, because we have those softer serendipitous moments, maybe getting lunch or a coffee before a meeting, walking through the corridors, commuting to work together, those types of moments, which mean that building the social capital and the in-person collaboration are very complementary. And so it'll be interesting to see how organizations maintain their business continuity and allow for people to shift to hybrid without tripping up on things like calendar conflicts or needing to delay a meeting numerous times to be able to accommodate everyone's schedules when they can all be in the office together. I know this will vary a lot based on your company size and where you're located, but I think it's not too surprising of an outcome and an interesting one in terms of the technology we will need to see coming into play to enable people to work from anywhere, join a meeting anytime, and maintain that productivity in a hybrid workforce. But with that said, I will wrap up the presentation for now, and thank you all for joining this session. And if there are any questions, then please get in touch with Mark IT, or any of your regional Jabra sales or channel teams. And thank you for the session.